Hi, welcome back to Elder Gal. So, if you saw my video last week, you know that I talked about almost getting shot at the side of the road when I was a Peace Corps volunteer in West Africa in 1977. So, I'm going to tell another story today that was even more life-threatening, actually, but it didn't involve the same kind of circumstance. And I'm going to talk about some aspects of that which are, maybe going to be surprising to you. But let me set the stage a little bit. Again, if you have not watched last week's video, please go back and watch it. I will link it at the end of this video today. But when we got to Africa in 1977, we were in for I think it was about 8 or 9 weeks of in-country training. And at the beginning of that, we actually got a medical lecture by the Peace Corps doctor. Yes, the Peace Corps had its own doctor in country that was a Western trained doctor. And it actually was not even considered safe for us to go to a local hospital because of the sanitary conditions at the time. And again, this was in the late 70s. Well, this Peace Corps doctor gave us a lecture on our second day in the country, and a bunch of us wanted to leave then because he scared the you-know-what out of us. I mean, there were so many things that could kill us there, like snakes, bugs, and we're not even talking about the people. Disease of all kind, all of these things could kill us. I'll tell you 2 quick things he told us. Well, first he said in the medical lecture, he was talking about rabies because we were all given preventative rabies, a series of those shots. And in the case that we got bit by a rabid animal, it would reduce the amount of injections we would need in our abdomen, which is, I think, where they gave the actual rabies shots. And so he's giving this lecture and saying, now, if you're bit by a rabid dog, he said, catch the dog, cut the head off the dog, put it in a bag, and bring it down to the Peace Corps office. And then we can determine if the dog has rabies. Now, I don't know which of the 2 things was more horrifying, the thought of getting bit by a rabid animal or having to cut the head off that rabid animal. I mean, we all looked around at each other and we went, could we get a plane out of here? Like, that was pretty scary stuff on the second day. So, and then on another occasion, the Peace Corps doctor said to me, a few months later, he said, he says there are 220 mosquito-borne viruses in Africa, but not all of them will kill you. And I'm like, what? I mean, we all knew about malaria. We were taking malaria preventative medication, but there are 220 plus? Oh my gosh. So anyway, that's the setting for what I'm going to be talking about. So you understand, this is not a safe place health-wise. It just isn't. And so about 5 weeks into training, I became very sick. And I mean very, very sick. And we were up kind of in the north of the country, so we were maybe 4 hours away from the Peace Corps office and the Peace Corps doctor, importantly enough, when this happened. But the good thing is I was in training, and so I was surrounded by not only other volunteers, but our teachers and administrators and everybody that was dealing with the program. So thank goodness, because I had lots of help. I don't think I would have survived if I hadn't had lots of help. But anyway, I got very, very sick. Well, their first thought was that I had malaria, because even though we took preventative malarial drugs, it could still break through. We had some volunteers that did get malaria while they were in training. I never really thought it was malaria because I'd seen other people with malaria and it just didn't seem like the same thing. Anyway, they gave me the prescribed treatment in case it was malaria, and that was involved a lot of these pills that we normally took only on a weekly basis, which themselves carry all sorts of strange side effects. But they did that, and it didn't work because I didn't have malaria. And I got increasingly sicker. My fever shot up so high that they had to send down to the kitchen at this place we were having our training and get a bunch of ice and pack me in ice. And then in addition to that, I was losing all my bodily fluids out of both ends, basically. So you can picture that. It was horrifying. It was absolutely horrifying. They tried to give me something like bread or bananas or something to eat, and I'd just throw it up. I was even throwing up water. But something inside me knew that I was going to die if they didn't give me a lot of fluids. There was no IV bag to give me until I went down to the Peace Corps office. So, and I was scheduled to do that, and I think it took about 24 hours for them to arrange that and get me down there and all of that. But in the meantime, I easily could have died that night. But they basically, I told them, I even said to them, you've got to pour water down my throat. You just got to pour it down my throat. Even if I throw some of it up, some of it will stay in me and I'll be okay. Somehow it was just a primal thing. I knew that. I knew I had to have water upon water upon water. Well, in spite of all that, and they did that, and someone stayed with me all the time, and I was on we were at this little boarding school for girls, and they had these little cubicles, basically, with these little narrow single beds with a little, old mattress on it and everything. I was on that. And it was miserable. It was miserable. One of the volunteers that was a friend of mine had been a Catholic monk, actually, and he kind of did his own makeshift version of last rites on me that night. I mean, that's how serious it was. And we still didn't really know what it was because we'd pretty much ruled out malaria because the medications they gave me for that should have worked. Well, at some point in the night, this is kind of the magical part of this whole thing. At some part in the night, and I never went unconscious. I was always aware, even if I had my eyes closed, I was always aware of sounds and things like that, but I never became unconscious. And I was almost too sick to sleep, if that makes any sense. I mean, sometimes you can just be too sick to sleep. So at some point in the night, I had this feeling that I wasn't going to make it. And it wasn't a panicked feeling. It was a very calm feeling. And I remember in my head, I didn't say this out loud, but in my head, I asked God, I said, God, am I going to die? Because I really thought I was going to die, but I wanted confirmation. And then the strangest thing happened. And I've only had it happen that time and one other time about 2 years later, that almost a similar thing happened. It was like everything, all the sound disappeared for a second outside of me. Like everything just disappeared, but I was still conscious. And then there was this silence, like I'd never heard a silence like this. There was no sound for, it seemed like a few seconds. It's like almost like a vacuum, had vacuumed out all the sound. And then this voice came through. And I will never forget the voice. Like I said, I heard the voice about 2 years later as well, same voice. And I knew it wasn't my voice. I knew it wasn't me, but it was something coming through. And this voice said, this big booming voice. I mean, it had so much depth to it, and it was loud without seeming loud. You know what I mean? It was all encompassing in my brain. And this voice said to me, no, it's not your time. And the minute the voice said that, I knew that was the truth. Like it was just the truth. I didn't even question it because there was something so different about, I had never heard anything like this in my entire life. And so I was really astounded, even in the moment, by it. But I trusted it. And I didn't tell anyone right away. I don't think I told anyone about this until after I recovered. But then I was able to rest because I knew I wasn't going to die. And while I was still very sick in the morning with a high fever, and they had to, bundle me in the back seat of this car, and a couple of the people that were our administrators drove me down to the Capitol, to the Peace Corps doctor's house, where actually he took care of me. He had a dedicated room in his house for, ill volunteers at times. And he and his wife, who was a registered nurse, they took care of me. And I was sick for about 2 weeks. And I only gradually got better. I mean, it took a while, but the danger was past. Once I got down to his house, the danger really was past. And at one point in time, I said something to the Peace Corps doctor about, I really thought I was going to die. And he said something to me like, he said, if you trust in yourself and you trust in God, then whatever's supposed to happen will always happen. It was kind of a very cryptic thing to say, but I never was really scared that I was going to die after I'd heard that voice. And I never forgot that voice. Now, I'm a spiritual person, so I believe that voice probably, it may not have been God as we, think of God. It could have been an angel. It could have been a guide. It could have been all sorts of things. But I do believe it was something outside of myself. And then 2 years later, I heard that voice again when I was giving birth to my son, and it was a very difficult labor. And at one point, I remember asking, is the baby going to be all right? Like, I didn't even know I was having a boy at the time. That was before they did ultrasounds routinely. And I heard that voice again. And at that time, the voice said, "You will never have to worry about him." That's all. Very simple. You will never have to worry about him. And the minute I heard that, I knew it was truth. And the strange thing about that is that all during my son's childhood, and even now as he's an adult, I have never had to worry about him. I've always known that somehow he's protected from most things that you would have to worry about as a mother. Like, that was the greatest gift I ever got, was that message of you will never have to worry about him. And again, the irony of that is I didn't know I was having a boy. And even when I heard the voice say that, it didn't hit me that he said him. So it was really it was a very interesting thing. Now, that's the last time I've heard that voice. But I expect that someday when it's my time to go, I will probably hear that voice. So, as you can tell from my story, I recovered. I survived. They never did totally 100% know what had happened to me. In other words, why I was sick. The doctor thought it could have been cholera. The problem was, by the time I got to him for treatment, I was already, some people do recover from cholera without being on an antibiotic. It's basically a bacterial infection. It's possible it was cholera. He said that was probably the most likely thing based on the symptoms and the fever and the, losing all your fluids thing. But it could have been some other strange virus too. I mean, there was never 100% certainty because there was really no direct tests they could do after the fact. So I survived. It was another really, again, what's interesting about this is that incident happened about 3 months before the incident by the side of the road with the rifle to my head. So I had already survived something before I ever was facing down the soldiers and the rifle. So it was intense times. And I will have to say that several other times that I was in Africa, I actually got strange fevers, strange illnesses. Never like the one I had, though. Never like life-threatening. But just enough to make me sick for a few days and not be well. I mean, all the volunteers got strange things all the time. Some of them, I never had to be medevaced, but a lot of them were medevaced for like intestinal problems and things like that. So anyway, I was very fortunate. I'm very grateful I survived. Most of all, I'm really grateful for hearing that voice because that was a really life-changing message for me because I knew then for certain that there is something greater than ourselves. There is definitely something greater than ourselves. And I know a lot of you out there are, have a lot of faith either in a traditional religious sense or in a spiritual sense. And I think all of you in your own way know that to be true as well. So anyway, that's how I survived that in Africa. That's story time for today. So until next time, be well, Keep moving forward. Take care. Bye.